All right, it's time for my favorite segment that we do here on the podcast, a members segment. We have Alan from New York City, who's a Reload member, joining us today. How are you doing, Alan?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out to come on it. Just a reminder, everyone, if you're a member of the Reload, you have the opportunity to come on and do one of these segments on the podcast if you want. It's just a little personal interview, try to get to know our members better, try to get to know the people who make the Reload possible, literally, because that's our one source of funding is membership. So, speaking of which, what's your background with guns, Alan? How did you start? Do you own any guns?
Yes. It took me about 14 months to get my long gun permit in New York City. So I finally purchased my Beretta 1301 tactical in Marine two-tone, actually. So I got to shoot it at a shotgun class earlier last month.
That's a nice gun. That's a nice shotgun.
For first,
how do you like it?
It is wonderful. I love shooting it, and I think in my shotgun class, 7 of the 8 of us were running 1301s of various types. The only one gentleman who didn't have one had an old Benelli pump from like the 80s, and he was very jealous of us. So
nice. So do you use that for like range shooting or home defense? What was your idea in getting that Beretta?
Well, I think the general idea was it would be very versatile. Like originally, what pushed me into getting my permit finally was like, I think in 2021, I think it was right after the Atlanta spa shootings with the anti-Asian animus stuff. But then obviously over the course of the 14 months of waiting, the fear kind of dissipated because it's like, well, yeah, I couldn't have anything for 14 months. So now it's definitely more of a back to a marksmanship sport shooting interest now. I think I've always been fairly interested in guns. I think it's just part of living in America. You get all that cultural osmosis and all that.
Sure.
Except that if you live in New York City, you just don't get to be part of that until like
it's much harder.
Yeah.
So you're a relatively new gun owner then,
right? This year, but I've like shot firearms on and off like at various stages of my life. Which is the irony is, I think I shot my first 22 in China at a police range. I don't even think I was supposed to be there, but I think with all the early 2000s corruption, I don't know, who knows. But whatever my dad did, we got in, right? Or it's just legal to do that. I have no idea.
And so, how long have you lived in the U.S.? When did you move here, and when did you move to New York?
I moved here when I was 3 years old. But my parents were citizens when they gave birth, so I'm still technically native born. But I've been living in New York City for like basically my entire life ever since I moved here, with the exception of 2 years in Jersey City because of rent. It's much more affordable to move out to Jersey City for a while.
I bet.
And I had considered getting a Jersey FID at the time, but I was like, if I'm moving back, it's going to take like months just to get a New York City permit. It's not going to, why bother with a Jersey City one? Because at the time, Jersey City was also running the same extra requirements on top of the state police requirements. That I noticed before, like I think JRPC did something and forced them all into compliance. But it's all a little annoying to say the least.
Yeah. And it's interesting to have somebody on from that, this part of the country, New York, New Jersey, where gun ownership is much more difficult than most of the rest of the country, right? In Virginia, where I live, or Pennsylvania, where I was originally from, you can, as long as you don't have a record, a criminal record that disqualifies you or a mental health record that disqualifies you, you can go into a gun store and buy even a handgun same day, as long as you pass that background check. There's no waiting periods or a bunch of extra hoops to jump through. Whereas, across the border in New York or New Jersey from Pennsylvania, at least, the process is pretty draconian, really. I mean, like you said, it took you 14 months just to get a shotgun.
Yes.
Not even a handgun.
Yes. And the funniest part is when I was doing my NJ FID just to be able to shoot alone at ranges, just to get some handgun practice in, because you can't shoot handguns even without I think New York permit regardless. in New York. So
Mhm.
I was like 35 days. This is like remarkable. It's wonderful. I don't even have to go into the police precinct to get my fingerprint. I could just get my fingerprints done, and I didn't have to go anywhere. So it was like very surprising at how every other jurisdiction is better than New York. At least
Yeah.
the way I see it, right? Even though some people don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, for instance, coming from a more typical form of gun regulation in Pennsylvania, Virginia, when I tried to get my DC carry permit initially, back when they were still May issue, the process of having to go into the police station and fill out registration forms and have your fingerprints taken, it felt very much like being treated as a criminal, right? I know it's not like having your fingerprints taken for concealed carry licenses is not completely out of the ordinary. I think Florida does it as well.
Yeah, Connecticut.
If you've never been through that process, it really feels like
Oh, for sure.
like a criminal process. I mean, I think the other people getting their fingerprints taken, at least in the attitude of the person who was doing the fingerprinting when I was in there, they probably were some sort of criminals.
Right.
So it's interesting that difference in culture around how these things are regulated and how they're treated. And I wonder too, like how has your perspective changed since you went through that whole process? Has it changed at all? What impacted going through 14 months to get a shotgun, have on you?
Oh, it's very annoying to say the least. And you almost see there is always a partial logical basis for some of this stuff. I'm not to justify it, but it's like, oh, you need a safeguard person to call the cops if you're incapacitated or died, right? So, which forms like a social proof, right? If you can't get someone just to do that, it's like, okay, you could be a little off. I think that was the original motivation about it, instead of actually diving into your background. Because honestly, the closest analogy to New York City's regime is probably Canada. Like, you got 5-round long gun mag limits, 10-round handgun limits, like the rest of the state, but also like Canada. Pretty much almost before Bruin, it was just premise only. So basically, like Canada, you're transporting to the range and back. Except we were allowed home defense, right? Unlike Canada, but it really has made me skeptical of overly harsh regulations. So obviously,
yeah, I mean, because you said at the beginning here that your initial reason for wanting to buy this gun was the rash of anti-Asian hate crimes that occurred in 2021, right? When you first went to purchase,
right?
And it took 14 months before you could actually obtain the thing that you were trying to get to protect yourself from that situation, right? And even then, it's a shotgun. You can't carry it with you. It'd be even harder to get a pistol, in New York, and even harder still to get a permit before Bruin. And now after Bruin, they've tried to make it so that it's effectively impossible to carry it anywhere legally.
Right.
I don't know. Like, does that? How's going through that process?
It's really mixed, because I think this is something that probably was informed by just growing up in New York City. I feel I have taken a half European standard of like, oh, guns are a very fun hobby, fun sport shooting thing. So I could empathize with Americans who feel like, oh, this is my constitutional rights. I need this immediately. But as you can see, 14 months later, nothing has happened, right? I like the original impetus to do it was probably just like in the moment, you're like, oh man, I feel like I need something. But in the end, I didn't. I also live in a fairly safe area of New York and lived like 30 years of my life without really facing any real, street crime. Which lucky for me, right? Obviously, there are those in New York who aren't as privileged. So I can understand why they would want to carry. Do you feel like you feel like maybe you were? Do you feel like you weren't right in one, like that
the concern was overdone in your mind when you went to buy the gun, or
I feel like the original concern could have been like not 100% rational, right? It would be like, oh, statistically, top floor apartment, right? Who's really gonna do that, right? But I think there are those in less privileged positions than myself, then they probably have much greater public safety, private safety concerns than I do.
yeah,
Right. So
sure.
now I'm now primarily interested in, hey, this is a really fun hobby. You get to meet people. This shooting is obviously very fun. I think everyone could, in this
yeah,
hobby
absolutely.
can agree. So, so it's like I obviously hate having to go through this, right? But it's also like,
Yeah.
am I? And I
guess for you, it's
Yeah.
you aren't living in that sort of day-to-day danger,
right,
or you don't feel like you are.
right.
But I imagine going through that process for people who actually maybe are more exposed to criminal activity than the neighborhood that you're in or what have you. Like, do you feel that the process makes sense for them?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. Because I like it's costly. I think for me the shotgun permit was $140, $90 for fingerprints, premise and carry.
It's almost as
$340.
much as some shotguns cost.
Yeah. I mean,
themselves.
and it's renewed. You pay it every 3 years too. So it's like if you want to get carry, premise, rifle permit, you're basically paying like $900 every 3 years just to be able to keep your, I guess, collection or your rights.
Plus, you have to go into the police station fairly regularly.
Pay time off, and
so really, it's something that's not open to people who don't have the means for.
No, no, definitely not. I think they've only recently added language assistance on the licensing side. It was please email this email if you need language assistance. Otherwise, it's pretty.
Yeah, so a lot of immigrants are shut out of it as well.
Right. And if I've seen during 2021, during the whole anti-Asian thing, there was like a bunch of consulting services in the Chinatown areas. They were like gouging people too. They were like, we will give you $1,000 you pay us $1,000 just to have us fill this out for you. Right. And I'm like, wow, this is, because it's not even guaranteed at the time too. So it's like, wow.
Yeah.
What a grift.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
So to lighten things up a little bit, what have you been doing with the shotgun? What your target shooting? Are you competing at all?
Well,
taking classes?
Primarily target shooting. I've taken that a shotgun class upstate at Blue Mountain Range, which is Westchester. I think it's public land. And it's a very, very fun course. I think we shot about 200 rounds of shells, which is like the most I've ever shot out of a shotgun for.
That's a lot of rounds.
Yeah, in one day too.
Especially 12 gauge.
Oh yeah, I had a pretty
sore shoulder
afterwards. But the main issue is we're purchase rationed, like, so we can register one long gun every 90 days. Handguns is the same, but you got to bring it into 1PP for inspection. And I'm still waiting on my handgun permit. But
how long has that been?
I've applied at the same time. They're saying it's going to take about 23 to 24 months in total for the home possession permit.
Right delayed is a right denied is sort of an old saying.
Yeah.
But I guess it doesn't apply in New York City.
God knows how long it's going to take to carry, because everyone applied after and tried to get in before the September 1st thing. Right. So my plan is, obviously I want to shoot at least like once a month, but the main issue is I got to start with the new law. Until it's enjoined, I basically have to Uber to the range I'm a member at in Manhattan. Can't take the subway anymore. It used to be that you could transport it on the subway, locked and unloaded, just like in England, which is the funniest part. Now we're actually more strict in England, because even London lets you transport long guns locked.
There was a pretty big overreaction in New York.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't think that law is going to survive for very long.
Oh, for sure.
Hasn't been blocked yet. So,
but yeah, well, hopefully soon, because I definitely don't want to pay like $130 round trip just to go to the range every time. It will really put a damper on this hobby.
Yeah,
because it's already expensive. Like the ammo on its own. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what was it that got you into the reload? You're a relatively new gun owner here. How did you come across us, and why did you decide to join?
I think I think it was sort of like a combination of things. I think I remember either seeing you on a Vox podcast or on a other, like they had both someone from the Trace and from the Reload together. I forgot if that was Vox or something else.
It was Megan Kelly.
Right. Oh yeah,
that,
Megan Kelly's podcast.
But I was
Vox.
also on the Vox podcast.
Right. So it just sounded like you had a very measured take on things. Like, so one thing I find a little annoying about like I guess GunTube, as you want to call it, is there's a lot of clickbait hot takes, clickbait, or some people who clearly don't read which is something I've noticed a lot on some of the spaces I'm on. Like people just don't read the statutes or they can't seem to read, right? As horrible as that sounds, some people.
No, it's sensationalism really sells these days. So
so measured takes. Yeah, measured takes. I then went to your site, saw some of your articles, and I'm like, this is probably the place for me, And I decided to just help throw $10 you guys' way because it's like it's coffee a day, barely.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's what we try to go for, be the more sober, serious sort of approach to this stuff. And I do think that there are not a lot of other options for that out there. We're not the only ones, I'm sure, of course. But I think we've tried to zero in on that.
Right.
And I'm glad to hear that that's what appealed to you. And we really appreciate you coming on and just talking to us a little bit, giving us some insight into, another Reload member. And we've got such a diverse group of people from all kinds of different backgrounds and motivations and areas of the country too, from New York City to, Tennessee to Virginia, DC, Pennsylvania, all over the place. It's really inspiring to me that so many people are interested in this kind of work because, it is something that you don't find in major media very often, or frankly, in a lot of gun media either. So
it's very like if sometimes when you read mainstream news about these laws, it's just like, oh, they don't even read the laws either. So
no. They don't understand anything about gun ownership, it seems, for the most part in major outlets. I mean, they just don't have I think a large part of it is there's no focus on it. It's not a beat that most media outlets cover as a beat, as something to be focused on. And so usually you get a lot of people writing about gun stories or gun laws who have never covered that before.
Right.
And so you get a lot of mistakes and misunderstandings.
Right.
But so that's where we try to be a little different, informed and independent, right? Is another thing we try to focus on being. So